Oh, yeah, good point.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity to provide an update. This is a little bit of a different view than I'm used to. Of course, you've been a member of our committee, and so you've got a great scorecard of where we're at, but looking forward to sharing an update, and then also looking forward to the planning commissioner's input and the work we've done. So I'm going to present this in tandem with Tyler, because he is an absolute expert when it comes to both solar and in our zoning ordinances. Just for context, this is a committee update. Our goal at this point is to come back at the next planning commission meeting. We've got a path to do that, assuming we can take care of all the public notice items and present the same material with your input as part of a public hearing and for action by the planning commission. So this is essentially a draft, an update. So also for context, it was 11 months ago. I'm sorry, it was 13 months ago that we were all sitting, hearing a presentation for a special use permit for a solar project. That the project is currently tabled as an extension of the discussion. We considered following the same path as the other surrounding counties were doing, and that's this committee. So this committee was formed in April. Its charter, as you see here, was created by the Planning Commission, focusing specifically on solar ordinance topics. And I've added emphasis to a couple key phrases. Ultimately, this is all about a balancing act between a lot of very kind of complex and intertwined dynamics, many of which tie right in with the sorts of things we often consider when we're hearing other proposals. And it very much leverages, and it's very fortunate timing that we're aligning with the comp plan update, because a lot of these themes are important to the comp plan, and we also have an opportunity to integrate it. But we did a review of existing ordinances, what other local counties and governments have put together for their ordinances, how we might improve our ordinances, and how we can make sure that solar's aligned to optimize the support to the county. And we certainly took a swing at understanding the standards for how solar works, how that impacts our natural resources, our farmland, our views, our historic resources, and how it ties into our economic interest. The charter also spelled out the composition of the committee. I was very fortunate to be selected to serve on it, and also to serve as the chair. You can see here the list. Chuck French from the Farm Bureau was the vice chair, and Matt Payne from actually a citizens committee, a citizens group, was our secretary. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lance was also on the commission. Mike Liskey, who's here as well, was a representative from the Citizens Advisory Committee. Again, a tremendous linkage back to the comp plan. Very fortunate to have Mr. Frank Nolan from the Shenandoah Valley Electric Cooperative. Frank also participated in the Shenandoah County, the Rockingham County committee. Mr. Keith Stevens from the Economic Development Council, and then two citizens who were here at a meeting. And Mr. Chairman's like, who else here is interested in solar? And Mr. Cook and Mr. Beller are sitting in the back. And so that sealed their fate, and they've also been very important members of the committee. The county staff has provided a tremendous amount of work and research and support to this effort, and would not be where we're at today without the county staff's work. Also would point out that we've had citizens involved in every meeting, sometimes a small number, but a very influential and knowledgeable group of citizens. And the committee also had a chance to learn from a variety of sessions, including seminars. I jumped down to the the transition on the slide, but I got to kind of back up here a little bit. This outlines the plan of work that this committee undertook. So we were formed in April, and we don't need to go through each one of these meetings, but we spent a tremendous amount of time understanding solar, understanding the policy space, visiting sites and seeing what solar looks like on the ground. We did both extremes. We did a power plant in Mount Jackson, and we did farms and retail establishments in Rockingham County. And all that was designed to help improve our awareness and understand how solar works and how we could best balance all these factors in zoning recommendations. So we've now entered the phase where we've had numerous meetings really hammering out recommendations on ordinance zoning changes and some policy changes, and we're going to get to those here in a little bit. But so now we're wrapping up. We're here tonight on the 3rd. We're going to have some sort of meeting again in November. It is a difficult month to get on people's calendars, but again, the goal is to make a final presentation on this at the next Planning Commission meeting as part of a public hearing, and for the Planning Commission's actions and recommendations for the board. All right, so I mentioned the staff and their important support. These work products, you can't really read them here on the screen. I think they're all in your packets, but this really illustrates the amount of work the staff's put in this. On the left, the table was a tool that Tyler built that crosswalks what Shenandoah County has current solar ordinances, which is actually pretty good. I'd say better than average for sure. And then he went out and researched what other localities have for ordinances. And then he also aligned it with industry standards or planning standards. So this was a great baseline for us to understand kind of where we were here in the county. And we relied on that a lot. Additionally, we identified concerns. I think Tyler also just kind of pulled this. He just captured these on the right key attributes or key issues that he heard during the discussions. Whether that was community hearings or special use permit. I think there were some other engagements, and like Matt's not here, but and Tyler on the right, he identified all these different topics that then we as a committee, we scored our view on how important they were. And that gave us a great starting point to understand, what the most important issues were, and understand kind of where the committee felt. So that was, again, we would not be here if we didn't have that kind of staff support. So one of those sessions that we did have involved discussions with the state solar planner from Virginia Energy, and he helped us understand what kind of the state's view in solar. And so the first code that's referenced here in this slide is related to the Virginia clean energy policy. But essentially, the takeaway is municipal governments are expected to provide some sort of reasonable criteria to kind of dictate when and where you're going to have solar. The center code reference is important as well, that we'll get back to, which is already today, really even independent of the county code, citizens are allowed to have solar on their own homes or businesses by right. So this references rooftop, but so the state's already kind of said, hey, this is what we want. We want to create an opportunity for individual homeowners or businessmen, people to invest in solar. And then you probably know, but Governor Youngkin recently released a 2022 Virginia Energy Plan, and that's the last reference here on this slide. And that creates a framework of all of the above that provided some pragmatic views on energy and specifically on solar, and that solar, while it's very promising a way to generate electricity, it's not it's not the only solution. Certainly without storage, solar does have some gaps. So we were fortunate that came out because that's an important waypoint in our journey. It also kind of illustrates the nature of the process. We'd have meetings and then something new would come out. And so sometimes we're having to go back and catch up, but we keep pressing on here. By the way, and some of these slides are really designed not just for you as the commission, but also for the public hearing where hopefully the citizens will see the amount of work we did and how we got at it. So another example of something that happened to occur at the same time that we were having our meetings was that the state recognized concerns about local governments control zoning matters. And so they wanted to understand where the different county and independent cities were. So basically we were not alone. We recognized, we knew that Rockingham County had done a review, but in fact, what we didn't know was that the state had done this survey. There was pretty good participation rate, 82% of the counties and cities provided feedback, and that when it comes to rural localities, we're within the almost 70% of rural localities that are doing what we're doing now, which is either just change our zone or solar policies, or we're reviewing them right now. Also very fortunate because I mentioned earlier, we're in our review cycle updates for the comp plan. This is for all the respondents. Almost 70% of the localities in the state are looking at adding energy into their comp plan as well. So again, we're very fortunate. Mike's been a key member of the committee, and one of the things we're going to, one of our outputs is going to be some thoughts on how energy needs to be addressed in the comp plan. All right, we're almost through. We're almost down to the nuts and bolts here. So other important context, we all know that Shenandoah County already has solar. In this case, the town of Mount Jackson has 2 solar projects, and of course the large energetics solar project, which is going to eventually exceed 600 acres, provided a kind of a catalyst for the county. A lot of discussions about that project and what it meant and how it impacted people, whether they were in the town limits or they were in the county adjacent to this very large solar site. We did visit it. My takeaway, the team there is very committed to doing a good job, running an excellent solar site, and they refer to it as a power plant. So in fact, that's what it is. It's a very large site with security fences and lots of power generation equipment. So and of course, you may know Triplet has a small solar site there at the school campus. And then I actually drove by this today. The Planning Commission, before my time, approved the site on Garber Road, and that's going in right now, 32 acres. So, we won't belabor this tonight, but understanding solar and all the different types of solar is a very important part of understanding how we want to change our zoning. We decided to stay with the state's interpretation or taxonomy for solar, which isn't that sophisticated. It's either small or large. But within the size perspective, there's the individual. I already mentioned this, net metering, which is also called distributed solar. Here, this talks about it as rooftop, but that's what you would have on your individual, on your personal home or business. There's other types of solar, but the county really, I think we became focused on solar because everyone was thinking about the implications for utility or large scale solar. And the good news is solar is not a binary option. We don't have to have either large utility or nothing. We can have a full range of solar and enjoy the benefits of it. But understanding kind of the different types of projects, the way the state is structured, for example, benefits or taxing or controls, it's all part of understanding how all these things fit together. All right, so now we're going to transition to our actual, these are our draft recommendations on both policy and zoning matters that, again, will be coming back in front of you folks here soon, hopefully in December. All right, so what we did was we had as part of our approach, we had tables, and we would go through and kind of identify the topic and then discuss the background. And and then kind of keep tabs on what the committee members felt. But it was a good tool to capture how we felt about solar, but it wasn't a perfect alignment with the way the county zoning ordinance is written, which is written kind of in a real kind of technical language and process. And so we really need to present to you like what the issues were, but then how that looks, what that looks like in code. So that's where Tyler's an expert on the code side of it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of bounce back and forth, but we'll jump in here. The first set of recommendations we had were to set a high level policy perspective for what we wanted people thinking about solar projects in Shenandoah County to understand our views. So, you know, it's about encouraging solar that's already allowed by right. That would be the net metering or distributed solar. Those are market driven. Those are individual homeowners and business owners making decisions. We want to have solar that's dual use and hopefully utilizing spaces that are already providing some other function, whether that be an industrial site or a rooftop or a parking lot. We wanted to reduce and minimize the impact on our one of our most crucial resources in the county, which is prime farmland or productive forestry lands. We also wanted to ensure that our historic resources and structures and sites remained pristine, and those provide a very important to our county, both to our history as well as to our tourism and economy. There are solar siting agreements, which as we get into our recommendations, that may not be an item that a scenario that occurs much with us because they normally are associated with much larger solar projects. But we said, hey, if we're going to have siting agreements, we want to try to funnel those benefits into educating our youth on technical education, such as solar or electric vehicles. Tremendous amount of citizen and committee concern over the environmental impacts of solar. So there's a lot of work to be done to revise our policies in the landfill to make sure that we're much like now, if you pull up and they ask if you got a tire or a television, you're likely you're going to add a third thing to the list and say, do you have a solar panel? Because we don't want panels going into the pit. And there's some other restrictions that we feel are appropriate as well. The energy storage is something that is still a very evolving space. Even the state representative could not provide a detailed vision for what the state thinks, where they see the state going for. Basically, this is battery storage of solar generated electricity. So that's still ways off, and the technology is evolving. But we want to make sure that we didn't lump that with the process to get an approved permit for a solar generation site. We want to have we feel like the storage and understanding what storage means is going to take a little bit more work, along with wind generation. And then the staff, you know, they've been great at this, but this is a moving target, and the staff's going to need some help and resources to kind of stay on top of this. So all those points get summarized into this paragraph, draft paragraph, which would go in the front of or the zoning portion of solar. And so each of these sentences basically crosswalked each one of those points. Any questions on the policy side? High level view. Okay. All right. So two of the things that we recognize as solar, especially large solar, will impacts a large number of citizens, both immediate surrounding landowners as well as really citizens from the whole area. And so we also leverage Rockingham County's approach, which is that you need to have a community meeting dedicated just to the proposed solar project. This again is for large solar projects. Of course, you would have a public hearing for a special use permit, but this is above and beyond. Before that, this is separate. This is to really get all the stakeholders together, make sure there's transparency, people know what the project's all about, and have a dialogue about that. So, and then the second item, we recognized that it was a tool. This is something that I think Page County had a good approach for, which is looking at a kind of high level impact assessment. Very comprehensive, looking at the economic impact of a proposed solar project. And so both of these were items that the committee did recommend that we include. And this is what it looks like in code right at the moment, the draft code. So Tyler, you want to take a swing at this, or do we need to kind of point out like what this looks like?
Yeah, so I mean, this is just explaining the first part about the community meetings, or just provide you the definitions of it and noting that the applicant would be required to hold a community meeting, which is prior to the public hearing. Then likewise for the impact statement, you know, a definition as to what an economic impact analysis would detail, stating that they would need to provide that both at the time that they apply for the special use permit and at the time of decommissioning. So whoever's here in 30 years could, you know, compare their report that's done by the applicant at that time to the report that was done when it was issued at the current day.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Any questions on a community meeting or an impact assessment? Okay, go ahead, Dan.
On a community meeting, and I might have to ask Evan this, do you have to advertise just like we do for a rezoning or a special use permit? Is it time sensitive?
We've taken that code section and essentially defined what the properly noticed community meeting is, and that it follows that same language.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a,
Sorry.
Yeah. I told you the staff was on this, you know, yeah, so, good question. Yeah, I mean, I think this is, this certainly, a lot of these, the committee felt like a lot of these recommendations help communicate the vision for what Shenandoah County, kind of where and how much we want solar. So like an applicant would see this, they would understand that there's a lot of rigor in here, that they're going to need to be prepared to address a lot of these issues. But some of the applicants may be our fellow citizens and farmers who have a piece of non-productive land, and it's a great fit for this. But, you know, still, obviously, the neighbors are going to have questions, or, you know, others are going to have interest. So we want to make sure that we're really starting this whole process for these future projects with the transparency. We're going to shift to, we kind of grouped the recommendations by kind of a category or like a theme. So the next theme is size. And so I made a comment that, you know, solar is not a binary choice. We all got excited about solar because of utility or large scale solar projects, such as the one in Mount Jackson. But there is a lot more to solar and kind of how it can provide benefits to our citizens. And so I already mentioned earlier, the first item there, we decided to standardize with the state's taxonomy, which is basically small or large, but that does allow us to kind of, in the future, to map out any, as the state's laws change, we'll understand how that impacts here in the county. We also decided that we wanted to recommend a aggregate cap, a limit by number of acres for the entire county. This cap includes every solar project, regardless of whether it's in the county or if it's in a town. And this also maps or aligns with the strategy that Rockingham County and Page County also took. Our recommendation is that we set our county cap at 900 acres.
Is that retroactive?
No, that counts all the the staff will maintain an inventory, and that includes all the existing acreage to date, which is 3 projects. It's the 3 that were on my earlier slide.
Right.
Yeah.
That would include them.
Yeah.
That's our intention, and we'll work through with Jason and Jordan, making sure that we codify that appropriately.
Yeah. Thanks. Another important size dynamic was the size of each individual project. And so It goes back to this reasonable criteria that the state expects the local governments to enact. And we also leverage the concepts for surrounding counties. And our recommendation is going to be a cap each a large solar site at 50 acres, which would include the entire disturbance zone. That would be every buffer, every fence line, screening, wildlife corridors, equipment, the entire physical site. The footprint will be limited or restricted to 50 acres total. We're not going to do this tonight, but we're going to have the numbers or the math of how we arrived at both the 900 and the 50. And 50 is a interesting threshold. That is using kind of current rule of thumb, generally accepted outputs from today's solar panel technology. That's basically 50 acres is
5 megawatts.
5 megawatts. And 5 megawatts is the lowest amount of output that's qualified as a large site. So we are at the very bottom of what the state considers large. Now, there's other criteria that also kind of tie into small and large, but this is both of these, but this one especially is really gets at that's balancing act. So you've got property owners, development rights, and weighing against the impact and the attributes that this county values and prioritizes. And so we're going to get more into detail on what type of farmland, for example, they'd be able to use, et cetera. But ultimately, the physical size of it very much sets the tone for even interest in prospective developer to have in sites here. So 50 is a very conservative number. And we feel like this is a good compromise for this county. All right, so these details Tyler's already got these written out in the draft code. I don't know that we necessarily need to crank through each one of them, but I'll get in deep water here real fast. But one thing that we've learned is that even when we talk about large versus small, you need this much detail because that's how state code, for example, kind of specifies large and small. So there, Tyler, let me jump out of the deep end and throw it to you.
Well, so the large scale and the small scale definitions haven't changed since the last time you all have seen them. The only thing that's been added is a new thing with state code is addressing the energy demands of a site. So let's say you own a corporation and you want to install solar adjacent to the property to power the entire factory. Well, state code says that you're allowed to do that. So we had to figure out how do you define that. So we just codified that just to be in line with what the state allows and what the state says that we should allow. As for the aggregate cap, as Mark had mentioned, the committee had agreed upon 900 acres, and that was based on a couple factors. Originally, we looked to compare ourselves to Rockingham County's ordinance. So we took Rockingham County's aggregate cap as a percentage of their total land mass. And that wound up being about 0.3%. So we multiplied that by Shenandoah County's total land mass and wound up with 1,080 acres. Then we wanted to really give some details as to why that number might have come up. And so we just went through and this explains how a U.S. customer usually uses about 10 megawatt hours a year. We have 17,500 households. So that means we need around 186,000 megawatt hours every year in order to power every house in Shenandoah County. Then if we assume that, based on the current standards for solar, 10 acres for every megawatt, we would need around 1,020 acres for solar for all residential houses that are in the county. But the committee also was looking at how the breakdown was for Rockingham and Page and some other localities, and they saw that they come down slightly from their number. So that's what they eventually agreed upon, 900 acres as being that total cap. here is just how it is written in code. This doesn't say here, another update that the committee added, but this does not include community scale solar. So like Fred Farber's project, which you all saw, that was a 32-acre site. All the power from that goes right back into the grid for local power. That site would not be included in this cap. So it's any sites that are, selling to a larger grid outside of the county. Those are ones that fall under these requirements. And the 50-acre requirement, which again, just covers everything and that's disturbed by the project.
Yeah, and then, thanks, Tyler. So the aggregate cap doesn't include what's already allowed by right, which is net metering or distributed solar. And then the community and shared solar is really a space that really the state, you don't see a lot of that yet, but that's for consumers that want to invest or have solar electricity, but maybe don't own their own property. So it'd be if you live in a town, maybe in a townhouse or an apartment. Bless you. And then you could have a parking lot, for example, that would have solar panels over the parking facility. And then that solar would then serve those customers who wouldn't have access to their own land or their own rooftop, for example, they're renters. We did not choose to include that in our cap because those are a little bit of a different category. The aggregate cap really is designed to preserve our farmland and our rural open scenic land. So, right, so we had an extension of the discussion on both site and aggregate caps and preserving our farmland leads into understanding that our land and what land we would optimize or prefer to have utilized for solar. And so a couple members of the committee, specifically Chuck French and Mike Litsky, went way above and beyond. They worked with Tyler, and we started with new legislation from the General Assembly this past year, House Bill 206, which just says that in Virginia, you're not allowed to use more than 10 acres of prime farmland, or you have to provide some sort of mitigation plan, which is a good first step. But Chuck and Mike said, wait a minute, soil is a lot more complex than that. And so you'll see it here in a little bit. We have recommendations on the percentage of types of soil. I'm real proud of their great work. In fact, you've already seen this in the Planning Commission because the last rezoning matter we had actually had a slide that had the land for that property, that proposed rezoning, and that came out of the same work. Tyler's already got it in like a GIS layer. And so, but again, we're recognizing that part of the question of where we want to see we want to allow for solar to occur is understanding what sort of soils are on that site. So again, a lot of code specifics on this and what it looks like.
Yeah, so basically just same kind of as before with the economic impact analysis. This, and you'll see this again when we talk about water quality, requires a report to take estimates of the soil, status of the soil throughout the construction process, and then every 12 months thereafter, just so then it's clear, staff knows what's going on with the soil on the site, if there's any contaminants that are going into the site. And then just a breakdown of the different definitions. As Mark mentioned, we're going off of the USDA's NRCS data set on soil data, which is about, it goes from 1 to 8, and they looked at classes from 1 to 3 for the percentages that you'll see. Again, this report is required at the time of the project application, as well as at the time of decommissioning and throughout the process. And again, that requirement that was developed by the group is that the disturbance zone, so the total project, shall not comprise of greater than 10% of class 1 soils, 20% of class 2 soils, or 30% of class 3 soils. And those are the top 3 most productive soils in the county. I'll hand it back over to you.
All right, great. All right, so really in the same theme, we also were able to leverage. So I think the soil stuff, I don't recall seeing a lot of other counties looking at that level of detail on soil. I really don't remember seeing that. Now, we did see, other counties, and I think Page County, and then we had a, Shenandoah has been very supportive as well, water quality. So we're all very, in touch with, how important water is as a resource. And, I mean, that's been, well, some of us had gone to some public hearings at Mount Jackson and citizens talking about runoff. So, the negative side of water, but then, there was a lot of people's concerns about potential contamination and the composition of the panel. So, again, the Virginia, General Assembly, actually, this was, I think, an executive ruling by the governor's office, but regardless of where it came from, there was a new finding on DEQ and how Virginia DEQ was going to treat stormwater as it related to solar. And I think it was also tied to just treating the panels as impervious surfaces, because they clearly are. And so they gave us the opportunity to say, hey, listen, the state's going to be focusing more on the stormwater management part of it, as our planning commission chairman said. I mean, a solar project is essentially a large construction site, right? And that's what Mount Jackson looks like. It's a very large construction site with stormwater management and ponds and all kinds of details. So it's certainly something we needed to focus in on and add more detail. And then the impact on water quality. So, how a solar site would impact the water in that area. And so I don't know that we have, again, so other counties had some pretty good water quality impact as well. And Todd, I don't know that we have this anywhere. Is this sort of detail reflected in any other part of our current code?
No. So this is all new code that you're seeing on the screen. And again, it's just the same as the soil quality analysis, just now we're testing water instead of the soil. And then, as Mark mentioned, the only other thing here to note is that, well, of course, so the facilities couldn't be located in the floodplain. They couldn't be within a 100-foot stream buffer, and they have to now be at least 50 feet back from wetlands or sinkholes. In addition, the panels on the site are to be considered impervious surfaces for erosion sediment control and stormwater management purposes.
Okay, so now a new category, sensitive areas, where we want to add extra caution or extra, kind of protections for solar sites. So a best practice is to account for wildlife corridors. This is something that we've seen. I think a lot of our surrounding counties also recognize the importance of this. I should add, these facilities will be required to be fenced in. So, this fence then creates a challenge for deer, for example, and how they might move or get to water, et cetera. So, I already mentioned briefly historic resources. Again, we're very blessed in Shenandoah County to have a lot of historic resources, important cultural sites, and we've got to find a way to. Our goal was to find a way to balance the impact for those, and then slope, which gets at kind of some of the runoff concerns as well. And so this is a grouping of those areas. I guess we jump right into code. So you go, Tom.
Yeah, and this, so again, we're talking about, again, another report. This one talking about wildlife corridors, wildlife habitats in the area, and how the project would impact that, as well as ways that the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources recommends to them to implement wildlife corridors on the site to allow for wildlife to pass through, and if that would be required. The only thing that was changed is that wildlife corridors would be at least 50 feet or larger per that report. And this just, again, details all aspects of that. Again, stating that would have to be done at the time of the application as well as the time of decommissioning. In addition, they've noted that it shouldn't occur on the tree canopy cover, wildlife habitat core, wildlife habitat edge, canopy areas. So those are additional areas where the solar would not be able to be applied on. Here are some definitions that were added by the group on historic resources in the county. So some are familiar. This one was just pulled from the floodplain ordinance. This is just referencing the resources identified in the comprehensive plan and state and national data sets. And then this, again, is another report that has to be done detailing the impact on those resources that are on the site or adjacent to the site and mitigation methods that the applicant would have to take. In addition, they've asked for an analysis to be done on historic landscapes. So, the context that historical aspects of the county lie in. So that was something that the group had asked to be added. And again, that's something that would need to be done at the time of decommissioning and at the time of the application.
Yeah, I think that was, yeah.
But they also have, that's on here, but they also have a requirement that facilities couldn't be located on such resources and have to be located at least 300 feet setback from those resources as well. And then for slope, the applicant would be required to present an as-built drawing so we know what the site looks like before construction happens, after construction happens, and then that would be used 30 years from now whenever decommissioning occurs, so that we know what the site looked like before any construction occurred. Just add definitions on critical slope, bridge areas, and just noting that such solar facilities could not be located on critical slopes and those bridge areas.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Yeah, and I would just add that two of those areas, I think the slope's already in the current zoning, but not, okay, so both slope and then the historic resources portion, they're being pulled out and they're gonna be there as definitions for other future zoning uses as well. So, you're probably thinking, well, why are we still talking about this stuff? We kept finding areas where we'd be like, hey, this applies to a lot of other parts of zoning. Historic sites, for example, was in floodplains, but clearly the historic resources part, and that's going to map to the new rewritten first chapter of the comp plan. So we're going to have really good alignment with the comp plan, and we'll understand, hey, when a proposal comes in, again, the applicant's going to understand they're going to have to be able to explain and understand and articulate how that could potentially impact historic resources. But all right, so let me back up. So these were we are getting ready to finish this up, but so these were more related to the way the site's constructed or the appearance. And so some of these we already had, and some of them we just just add a little detail to. Obviously, we felt like the sites ought to be fenced in for security. We wanted to make sure that we had the correctly defined buffers, vegetative buffers. Ground cover, we already had some really good policies on pollinators, but panel height generated a lot of discussion because you're talking about dual use. Do you want them too high so that, but then that increases the view shed impact. And so, and then non-reflective materials, which is already kind of something I think we already had kind of addressed as well. So but this is all the kind of the attention to detail where we were just trying to grind through all the different pieces of it. So back over to Tyler, I think. Is this you? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so this is just, so the group had asked for us to lay out some more details as to the fencing that may be required on the site. So this is just the information as to what would be required with that fence. We refer back to the screen buffer definitions that are already in the solar ordinance to refer to as to what the screening would need to look like on the site. As for the pollinator plan, that was brought out a little bit further by the group, adding some details as to that the site would need to demonstrate at least 50% coverage on the disturbance zone of the project by pollinator friendly plants, and noting that the entire site must have some form of natural native vegetation, that they can't leave the site bare, and they can't just strip it and leave it as bare dirt after construction is completed. The committee asked for soil count that the facilities have to not exceed the height of greater than 5 feet. That's not to include, the small scale facilities, which could be over parking lots or on your roof or anything like that. Those are different. These are just for facilities that fall under that large scale definition. The ordinance now states that materials have to be non-reflective and cause the least amount of glare and glint.
Yeah, so, I know this is going on, but this next category was, really, I think, an important discovery for us. We heard a lot of concerns about on the environmental side. And then the impact of, what happens when the panels are no longer serviceable or they're damaged. This whole industry is growing so fast. There's all these factors driving, solar adoption. There's not a lot of industry yet that account for like recycling. So, we wanted to be able to give the county staff or the board a recommendation to help the staff understand how a panel should or shouldn't end up at the landfill, not in the pit, but maybe over in one of the buildings where you would take your other specialized items, an appliance or a television or tires. Yes, sir. So, and then, again, I guess I did cover this as well, is that, the whole space for on-site energy storage, think a factory of batteries, is not mature enough yet where we felt comfortable that we would want that to be allowed as part of the application. That's going to have to be something that, especially as the technology changes, that, maybe there would be another committee or somebody focused figuring out how that looks. But, and then, and the same thing, we're blessed with all these, very professional, highly trained emergency service personnel, but, these sites will create new issues for them, so do they have the right training? Do they have the right equipment to deal with all these new challenges? So that's this part. And then, we already talked about the recycling piece. And the one item there is, I think in best practice, we actually leveraged that from Page County, which was requiring any of these large scale facilities to have their own on-site facility where they would then collect their own panels. And then we're not going to allow them to use our landfill. They're going to have to figure out how to dispose of them themselves. But we're going to dictate that they have a place where they actually can collect those and make sure they're not causing an environmental issue while they're there. So, and yeah, here we're to the code.
So as Mark mentioned, the committee had asked for energy storage systems to be separated from large scale solar and other energy systems. So we just provided the definition as to what's a large and what's a small scale, and it's pretty much the same as what we've talked about before. If you're using it for your own personal use and it powers your own house, then that falls into small, or your own business falls into small. Once it becomes larger than that and comes to a commercial scale, that's when it becomes large. And then we added some procedures for emergency and normal shutdown that they have to provide at the time of application, including being energizing the site, safe shutdown and such. Provided some details as additional regulations for large scale energy storage systems, noting that they would need to, provide certain equipment or training, if required, for our fire and rescue staff at the time of application, and that they have to take certain measures to comply with the building code for these facilities. In addition, as you already know, we already have the Knox boxes and keys on the emergency access sites. The statement now that, no signs, letter, or symbols could be on the large scale energy facility, like on the actual equipment. And then notes that they have to coordinate with the local emergency services in order to develop an emergency plan if needed on the site, and that they have to ensure that emergency vehicles shall always have access to the site.
Okay, very good. All right, well, listen, really appreciate your attention, and I know that was a lot of information, but that wraps up our committee report, and I'm certainly look forward to any of your questions or comments.
Any questions for Mark? We still have other reports and stuff for tonight, so any questions?
I have, in your thought process of the large scale facility, this is a lot of information to digest. I know it can be probably consolidated, but once you announce the public hearing or the public information meeting before the public hearing, will this be on the website? Or how will the general public be able to get a hold of this information prior to the general public hearing in order to be prepared before they come? You wouldn't want to go through all this at the hearing. You'd like to have them something in hand. What's the plan for that?
So it's on the website right now. I guess,
We're gonna treat it just like any other ordinance update and do the proper public noticing and then, which would be November 17th, would be the first notice for it to go out.
Because most informational meetings are kind of, directed to one issue. This is pretty complicated and pretty complex.
And I think Mr. Orson's jumping ahead to a hypothetical where an applicant says, hey, I want to build a 50-acre site. He's having the public hearing is we're going to ask for you to approve. You're saying at that point, how does the public have access to all the?
No, before, when you have a general informational meeting. I mean, it's a lot to digest. I want it to be accessible to the public.
Right.
How would that be?
You're talking about this ordinance update specifically?
Yes, sir.
I think it's a fair question.
We would have to figure out a way maybe to summarize it, maybe with links or, but you're right. I mean, it is, there's so much details. That's what we learned as a committee when we started kind of getting through this. And that's why this report and next month's, hopefully public hearing, there's a lot of moving parts to it, but that's an excellent point, Dennis. I think we need to come up with a solution where maybe there's a guide or like there's a link or, that, folks, the citizens could go and know how to ask the right questions.
Right, and there again, we may not ever be an issue, but I think there would be certain things like the number of acres allowed, size, the setback, but there's a lot of detail. Some people want to really get into the nitty gritty. And so if we can have hard copies available wherever, but then online, it's not a normal special use permit or, it's gonna be quite complicated.
Well, I think part of that is the solar committee as a whole, right? So, the 9 members of the committee who've been meeting 11 times to date, to talk about these specifics. And we really did sort of dive into a whole lot of detail. But we hadn't considered an additional public meeting aside from the public hearing that would occur.
Yeah, so if we're going to do this format, it would be hard for us to, again, even if I try to shorten this down a little bit, to really share all the details. And I think what you're saying is when in the future, when there was an actual application for a project, that's when those citizens are going to be very, very, they may not have even known that we had a solar committee, but whenever that application hits the street, they're going to want to know everything about it. So we'll have to maybe if there's a way to link that or have a note on the, or maybe, we'll have a way to pull this out or provide a pointer to it, if there's the notice for the public hearing.
I just think that the meeting will go a lot better if the public's somewhat educated prior to coming into the meeting. I mean, if they're going to be affected by it directly or indirectly, they're going to do some homework, hopefully.
Yeah.
So if we give them an opportunity to do that before the public informational meetings,
Right.
that'd be very helpful.
It's a great point.
But I want to compliment the committee and the staff. Y'all did a whale of a job on this. I mean, and I appreciate that, and the board appreciates it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I will say, we've had the one from December of last year. They've continued at Mr. Bowman's advice. They requested that planning commission extend their 60-day timeline. They did that again this week prior to this meeting, and came forward with a list of things that they were going to try and do. Did they finish with the timeline?
they haven't provided, I believe they're looking at sometime in the spring of next year, is when they'd like to come back in front of you all.
So they said that earlier this week that they'd like to continue to be not voting on.
Well,
Is there a drop dead date on that?
We don't know.
No.
Well, I'm gonna take this opportunity to get back to my seat. I would just say if you have specific concerns or feedback items, please email me or call me and let me know. We definitely have a window here where we're gonna make a few tweaks to what we have, and certainly if you have concerns or things that we want to know about that, because the planning commission's